Hi, my name is Chris McAulay. I have decided I'd like to start, you know, some tutorials on how to make games. Um, Personally, I use Monogame, so my tutorials will be done that way. And I wanted to start with just how to get a simple sprite onto a screen. Shouldn't take too long, but here we go. We're gonna create a new project. I have Monogame installed. You can look up how to do that on Monogame, or just Google Monogame or Bing Monogame, whatever it is you do. We're going to be using a Windows project. We're going to call it Top Down Shooter. Pretty simple stuff. It's a simple kind of game that I've actually never created, so figured spend a little time with that. Anyway, here we go. All right, so we load in. First thing I do with Monogame is I get rid of this file. I don't like it. I don't want it here. You don't need it. So I go in here and I put it right at the end of the game one file. And then it doesn't like this, so you have to delete it. Past that, it doesn't do anything. I just don't like extra files in my project. And then I like to call the main file main, and it's going to ask me if I want to change the stuff, and I do. So, all right, so we have done that. Just to make sure that it's all working, we're going to push F5. It's going to build and give us a blue screen, provided we didn't break the world, and there's our blue screen. Nothing there, but it runs. Sweet. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create some files, just real fast. We're going to need a content file. Oh, I'm sorry, we already have that one. Source file. Obviously, I don't do this very often. I only create usually a new game project every year or so. So, cut me a little slack here. And then inside the content, we're going to have a 2D folder. Other folders that we might want, which we're not going to use for this, but we'll put them in for now, is like audio and fonts is another one that I oftentimes want. If I could spell, that'd be great. Okay, so those are helpful. Inside source, we're going to have a file called engine. Now, later you'd create a library out of what's in this folder. I'm not going to go into that on this simple tutorial. Maybe I'll go into that another day. And inside engine, we're going to have the engine's globals. Now, this is just the way I do things. You don't have to. I have two sets of globals in my games. One is game specific, and one is for just the stuff for the engine. So we have this. I will go through how to add link. I don't need it for this tutorial, but eventually we will want system link here. So I'm just going to go and add the reference so you guys see how to do it. Right click here, add reference. You come down here and system.xml.link, and that's the one we're looking for. And look, it's literally the exact name. It's right here. And then we're going to push OK. And now it has it there, and it won't complain at us anymore. Okay, now inside globals, there's two things we need for this tutorial. There is content and sprite batch. Yes, I copy pasted them. I try not to do that, but this is important. This is what loads in your images, and this one is what helps to draw them. And I put them in globals so I don't have to worry about where I have access to them. When you get everything nailed down really well, you'll almost never be calling those. But for the sake of this specific tutorial and how simple I'm trying to keep this, we're just going to make them global so we don't have to worry about, passing them into functions and dealing with that kind of thing. All right, so we have those. In main, we need to, you can actually see this one here. We won't need this one in a minute. But you'll have the sprite batch here. We're not going to use theirs. We're going to use ours. Yes. So globals.sprite batch. So now that is our sprite batch. And then there is the creating the content and putting it into the globals, that would be this line here. So essentially this is just our globals content that we just created over here, and then we set it to the content of this specific main file. So Monogame just has that normally loaded in, but it's only for this file, so you'd have to pass it around everywhere. In this case, we no longer have to do that. Okay. The next thing we need to do before we even get started is we need to open and close a sprite batch, because we can't draw anything without opening and closing a sprite batch. Here we will use this, and I never type this, so I don't have this memorized. I apologize. A couple of these early things are just things you never do after you set them once. And then we will have to close the sprite batch. If you don't, it gets mad and it breaks. So it's actually end. So sprite batch end. All of your stuff needs to be drawn in the middle here. So just give it some space. We'll get to that in a minute. So we've now set up our ability to draw. Let me quickly go through the different functions that come standard in Monogame. You have your constructor. I don't use this for hardly anything. You can if you want to, but it's not really where it wants it. Initialize would be to initialize any kind of settings or whatnot that you have. I use this for just a few things, like getting resolutions and stuff. Later on, you'll have load content. This is where I load a lot of things. Anything that's not loaded in like a load thread, I load here. And then I start the load thread at the end of this. And then unload content, this would be where you would basically get rid of things that you are no longer using. The great thing about C# and Monogame is that the garbage collector does a pretty good job about collecting this stuff and getting rid of it, but learning to trash collect for yourself is always a good idea. Update. This is where literally everything you update in your game, all of your game logic should update through the update function. And if it's not done in here, you're probably losing efficiency, and there's some issues. Like some people will update in their draw function, and then the next thing you know, they're catching lag that they shouldn't be catching because their draw function locked up. It's already going to be very busy making sure everything gets drawn. You don't want to update in here. These two things are supposed to run separately, and you don't want too much logic or any logic running in your draw thread if you can help it. And then you have your draw thread. This is literally what draws your game. Okay, so now the goal of this is just to get a dude or a sprite drawn to the screen. That will conclude this tutorial, because that will at least get us to a point where we can start thinking about what we want for the rest of our logic. All right, so we need to have something to draw, and this is how you build a sprite for Monogame. And inside tutorials, I have this little hero PNG, and he's this ugly little dude, and you can tell that I'm not an artist. Here's his head. He got like a red shirt, and then he's got his two arms. That's about the artistic capability I have. I always have to have an artist to make something if I'm going to do a good job with it. But that is the sprite that we're loading in. I'm going to shrink that, and it's here. And when it builds to here. That's the program I was just showing you there. And in the bin tutorials, let me just show this so you can see it, because it's a little weird for some people. Same structure. Inside tutorials, you have this XMB file. This XMB file, you dump it in here. You click on it. You must do this part. If you don't, it will not load in properly. Content, copy if newer. You can see all these different choices. It's content, copy if newer. All of your files that are built for Monogame have to be content, copy if newer. If not, you essentially, it just doesn't work. Audio included, fonts included, everything has to be done that way. All right, so it's in there. Actually, I'll leave that open so you can see it. Inside here, we're going to create a world file. This will be where we run our active game logic, not menus, but our active game logic. So we'll call it world. Then I mentioned that I always just kind of use the same region Notice the region says include, so you can shrink it down. This is my style. You don't have to do it this way. This is how I do it. World's going to be public. Global should also be public. I don't know why I didn't do that. For the sake of these tutorials, and I know I'm going to get some flack about this, I'm going to make everything public so I don't have to worry about it. All right, so our world file is essentially a constructor. So public world. There's our empty constructor. We need public. I'm going to call it virtual void update, but you could just call it public void update, but there's a chance we'll be overloading this in the future. So we're gonna leave it that way, and then we're also gonna do public virtual void draw. If you're not sure if you're going to overload something, sometimes it's just best to put virtual in. The cost of it is minimal for your build times, and it leads to not having to go back and backtrack more often. Okay, so this is our empty world file. We need to create ourselves a little engine file for drawing a sprite to the screen, and then we'll put it in here. So now let's track into here. We'll say inside of our engine, we have our globals, which is cool, but we need to add a new item. And then I typically call my most basic object basic 2D. Why? Just because I do. You can call it whatever you want. If it makes you feel better to have it called something else, go right ahead. But it's the most basic thing I draw to the screen, and it's 2D, so basic 2D it is. I just remove all these for now for the sake of this tutorial. What these do, just so you guys know, is they're essentially namespaces, and if you wanted to have, let's say, this namespace usable in, let's say, world, then we would need to add that namespace in here. Speaking of which, I need to get rid of that one. If they're the same namespace, so like right now it's just top-down shooter, and this one is now just top-down shooter, you don't need to add it in here. It does help to stay organized if you use more namespaces, but you don't have to. All right, basic 2D, definitely public, because we're going to use it all over the place. And then we need constructor. We are going to overload this. 100% chance that this is going to get overloaded. So we're going to do public virtual void update. Later we will pass stuff in here, but for now I'm going to keep it simple. And we're going to do a void draw. Now hopefully you've already noticed a pattern. This is the basic structure of a monogame object that gets drawn. You're going to want to have it be able to be updated. I mean, just about everything in a game needs to be able to be updated. You need to be able to be drawn, and you need a basic 2D. And I'll show this all go in just a second. Notice in world, we did the exact same thing. This is our basic format. You can add other basic pieces later, but this is the very simplest format. All right, so for basic 2D, we are going to use just 3 variables to get this to work. Again, using publics. Vector 2. Vector 2 is basically like an XY coordinate. It's 2 pieces of float information. You can use that for anything you want. In this case, we're going to be using it for position and dimensions, denoted by position and dems. And then we need a public texture 2D. And then for whatever reason, I've always called this my model. You don't got to, but that's what I've always called it. To get the path for our model, it's just going to be a string, and then path. I denote things coming in from the function variables as all capitals. I've gotten the habit of that for a very long time, and I'm not going to change it. Other people have their own ways of doing that kind of stuff, but this is how I do it to keep track of it, and it has worked very well for me. So in here, we're going to set them equal because we need them. There we go. And then in here is the only one that's a little odd. So my model equals globals. Remember, we set our content to that, and then it's dot load. Then what it is, it's a texture 2D. And then we need the path. So there's our path. So this now will load in whatever we pass in there. In this case, it'll be 2D hero later, but we'll get to that in a second. And then the draw. Now this is slightly more complicated, and I use this all of never, so I am going to copy paste it. Very simple here is that it makes sure that my model is set. It's not null. And then it goes in and uses the global sprite batch. Remember, we created the globals. And it has a built-in function called draw. It takes in your texture 2D. It takes in a rectangle of the size of your object. So we are saying we want it to display at the position that we have it at, and then its sides, height, and width are your dimensions. I don't remember what this null is. It's source rectangle. Okay, so this allows you to only use a piece of your picture if you chose to. I have this filled in other overloaded draw functions. Otherwise, okay, so color. So if we were to put anything other than white, it would tint our picture. So let's say, because I have gray on the dude, and then I make the tint yellow, that's going to be a yellowy gray on the gray parts. This is rotation. Right now we're not going to rotate. Later we'll create a variable for it and we'll put it in. And then what this does right here is inside model, it has bounds. Bounds is the literal pixel size of it. Dimensions is whatever we chose to use. But this is the literal pixel size, so we're going to take that divided by 2 and this divided and the height divided by 2. Now we're drawing from the middle. That might sound odd to you that we're drawing from the middle of the image rather than the top left, but for a lot of things like rotating a guy, it's actually super helpful. This is essentially basic sprite effects. I can't even click properly. This is actually super inefficient. You would create this in your constructor and just pass it in, so you're not creating it every frame. But again, for now, we're not going to worry about it. And then lastly, we have layer depth. I actually do this separately. I try to rely on Monogame the least possible, but if you wanted to, you could use layer depth to layer on images. Again, I do that separately because I actually need it separately for the way I do things as things get more complicated. Now, let's see. We have our basic 2D, and since our goal is to draw one to the screen, we're going to add one here. So we have our basic 2D. I'm going to call him hero because why not? And then hero equals new basic 2D, and then new vector 2. And then I think I'm just going to try to draw him at 300. I'm sure that'll be on the screen, and since we haven't adjusted the screen, I'm not exactly sure. And then dimensions wise, we are going to do say 48 by 48. That sounds good to me. And then here is our string that denotes our path, right? So it's 2D hero. So again, 2D hero. Not magic. It's not complicated. But for some reason it does confuse people a little bit. So I wanted to make sure I covered that. And then in here we're going to say hero.update. And that's empty, so it doesn't do anything, but it will do stuff later. Hero.draw. And then we're drawing it. Don't forget your semicolon because that'd be dumb. Now, that's all fine and good, but world isn't updated or drawn anywhere. So inside main, we're going to come in here to update. And we're going to say, ooh, you know what? We haven't even created world yet. I come up here, say world. And then in load content, we're going to say world equals new world. Cool. Now we're going to come into update and say world dot update. And again, that doesn't do anything at this point, but it definitely is important. And then we have world dot draw. Now, provided I don't forget anything, which often I do, this should work. So we're going to load this up. Let's see it. There's our guy. And you can't see the mouse because you actually have to draw the mouse in the program. But there's our little dude. We have him on the screen at 300, 300. And that will conclude the tutorial of how to get a guy on the screen. In the future, I'd like these tutorials to be shorter. I'm sorry this one's running a little bit longer. But nonetheless, I wanted to get this started. And I wanted to get you guys thinking about how to create a game. I will be incrementally adding to this tutorial, specifically this tutorial, over the next while. And by the end of it, we'll have at the very least, a rudimentary top-down shooter in him. Depending on how far I end up getting with this little side project, will depend on how great it becomes. But we'll do this, and then next time we'll get him moving around with the arrow keys or ASDW kind of things. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. I hope this helped. If you guys need a tutorial on how to get Monogame set up or how to download and install Visual Studios, please let me know. In general, there's like a million tutorials on how to get Visual Studio set up, and there's quite a few on how to get Monogame set up, but if those are needed, I'll be happy to oblige. Anyway, first of many. Have a great day. Talk to y'all later.